be perfectly honest, three-wheeled vehicles like this Can-Am Spyder are not typically my cup of tea. And we have this Can-Am Spyder for quite a while, so I want to do a video where I ride this because I've been told by a number of people recently that riding one of these will actually change my mind about it. But the first video I want us to have on this Can-Am is a straight-up review of it. And our guy Brendan has a lot of experience with these three-wheeled Can-Ams, so I'm gonna toss to him for this review, and he's gonna give you the rundown on it.
So although I have owned one of these, it really wasn't my first choice, and we kind of happened upon it because when I wanted to convince my wife to get into riding motorcycles with me, she said, well, here's the reasons I won't. I'm afraid I'm gonna tip over, and I don't know how to drive a manual. And so this just kind of fit the bill, and it got her on a motorcycle-like experience. And I'll be honest, I kind of laughed at these when they first came out because as a longtime motorcycle rider, it just doesn't look like it would give you the experience that you expect when riding a motorcycle. And to be honest, you're correct, it doesn't, because if you look at this as a motorcycle, you will be very disappointed in the riding experience. But if you look at it as something wholly on its own and something completely different than what you have experienced before, I think it just could surprise you.
All right, so getting in and riding the Can-Am Spyder, there's a few things that are definitely worth talking about when it comes to this bike. Now, first thing is, it's pretty quick. You know, I mean, it's not, you know, Hayabusa quick, but at 115 horsepower and this thing weighing only about 1,000 pounds wet. Granted, obviously it's going to depend on you, the rider, how much extra weight you add to it. I'm a little bit of the heavier type, but it's still pretty quick, especially if you're coming from a car. This transmission is not fully automatic, so this is kind of like an automated manual or like a dual clutch where you do have to do all of the upshifts yourself. But the downshifts it will do for you. Now you could do the downshifts yourself, like see I can pull back and it downshifts for me, but I can ring it out and it's not going to upshift for me. I have to do that myself. That does take a little bit of getting used to. Now as a motorcycle rider, obviously it's still far easier than dealing with a clutch and shifting the lever with your foot peg, but it's still something to keep in mind.
So the motor in this is a 1330cc three-cylinder Rotax motor, putting 115 horsepower down to the ground, as well as 96 pound-feet of torque. Now, this does have some interesting things going on with it. It does have Brembo brakes. This is three wheels, but it is only one-wheel drive. You also only have exhaust on this one side, and you do have a really big drive belt here on this side.
Now let's talk about stability, because for me, that was the biggest concern I had when riding this, is the fact that with a motorcycle, they're so stable once you get up to speeds. Now I'm coming up to a turn here, and I'm going to take it pretty quick coming through because it is pretty darn planted through the turns. You know, you do have a totally different experience kind of turning this bike with your arms versus with your entire body. But it does hold the road really darn well. I mean, maybe not quite as fast as some of the fastest sport bikes out there, but it is super planted around turns.
So every single Can-Am does come with a front trunk, and you open it by putting the key in the ignition, pushing in, and then turning it in the opposite direction you would to turn it on. But once you do get the front trunk open, you'll see that it's big enough to fit about a helmet. You know, it's nothing super huge, but that's because you can option these with a lot more storage in the back if you get some of the higher trimmed models, which this isn't. This is actually what's called the F3, which is the entry level of these. And if you go up to the RT, I mean, you could be spending a lot more money, but you do get a lot more features and a lot more storage. Now, if you're shopping for these and you're looking at the F3 versus the RT, you will see that the front end is very different, actually. You can option two different front ends, but I do really like the styling of this entry-level one. You do have the turn signals here on the fenders, and then it looks like this could be optioned with some additional auxiliary lights, but overall, both of them kind of have like a almost sport bike appearance, or maybe like a sport touring appearance to them.
But as far as driving dynamics, the closest thing that I could say that this feels like is a snowmobile. And that kind of makes sense if you think about it, because it really is kind of like a snowmobile with tires instead of skis and a track, right? You do have the one drive wheel in the back, and then you have the two in the front that do all of the steering, just like a snowmobile. But obviously you're doing it on a paved surface, so it's much more sticky on the surface as opposed to being able to slide around in the snow. So it is kind of its own experience all unto itself.
So to start this up is a little bit of a process. It obviously starts by putting the key in and turning the ignition on, and then you will see that the screen here, or the dual screen, will go through a little bit of a system check, and then you have to actually physically push this button here to basically state, yes, okay, I have read this before starting it. So if you go over to this side, you have to make sure obviously that this is not in the kill spot, and then you have your button down here to start it, but you also have to make sure that your foot is on the brake before you give it a start. And yes, you only have the one brake, and that operates both the front wheels and the back. So now with it all set to go, I can actually start the bike up. You see, it fires up pretty easy once you go through that complicated process. And then another complicated thing that you should know about is getting it into reverse, because yes, it does have a reverse. Now you see this big giant R button up here on the top. You want to push that first, and it's almost like a two-hand operation, because you push this down, and then you do have the shift lever down here with a plus in the front and then a minus in the back for downshifting. So once you have this pushed, you can push back on the shifter, and now you're in reverse. Well, the one step I forgot is you do have to turn off the parking brake. And once you have pushed that, then yes, you are finally ready to ride. But remember, I have it in reverse, so I'm going backwards. To go forwards, then you just hit the plus, and that gets you into a forward gear. Then you can then go for a ride.
And now some of you out there may have three-wheeled experience with, say, your traditional trike, like a Harley Davidson trike or a Honda Goldwing trike, and these are totally different from one of those. I've actually ridden a Harley Davidson trike as well, and having the steering wheels be two wheels in the front versus two drive wheels in the back, it makes the experience completely different. A traditional trike drives a lot like a regular motorcycle with like a spare wheel, kind of like having an extra wheel on board as if you were to have a training wheel on it. Whereas this, it feels way more twitchy and way more darty, and it also kind of feels like it can handle a lot better and is a lot less tippy because it has those two free wheels in the front.
Alright guys, so there you have it. That is my unbiased opinion on one of these. If you haven't had a chance to ride one, I do really recommend checking it out because they're really fun, honestly. And I think that all of you out there that would be surprised at just how much fun you can have in one of these. But I would like to know what you guys think in the comments section below. If you are a motorcycle rider out there, would you ever consider the Can-Am? Either way, thank you guys so much for watching. Take care.